Hey guys, I'm so glad we're finally doing this.
And so, the topic for debate today, I believe it was the optimal size of government and what are the limits of governance, and is there a reasonable limit? Is there no limit at all? Like, we'll flesh it out a little bit more with these opening statements, though. So, I'm gonna flip a coin, Ovi and Nida. Oh, I guess Ovi, pick a side of a coin. It's a tails.
Sure, I'll take heads.
And
Like you always do.
that is heads. Ovi goes first. Ovi, opening
Oh
statement.
shit, okay.
All right, so how long do I have?
2 minutes opening statement.
Okay, sounds good. So first of all, I believe I am the proponent for a higher amount of government in this debate. Part of the reason why that is because I believe personal freedom needs to be enforced by a system of checks and balances. Without such system of checks and balances, freedom is only remains as such until somebody more powerful than you can come and take your freedom away. As such, there needs to be said system of checks and balances. Now, the problem with this system is that democracy is quite the ultimate perfect stage of our political system, because as we are noticing, especially in recent years, we can see the fact that democracy can easily be swayed as long as malicious parties know how to run proper propagandas um, through said freedoms of communication, right? So the more we look at it, the deeper we zoom into this whole idea that freedom needs to be respected, the more we realize that what we actually mean by freedom is not just ultimate freedom, but rather a certain set of bounded freedom which we all need to respect and have and not have as a um, shit. I was actually I had this written down, and then I ended up losing it. I had notes. I was starting to make notes for this, but the main idea here is essentially, if you have a certain set of freedoms, right, that are unalienable rights, you cannot have those freedoms guaranteed without a more powerful system which can impose such rights when a larger party than you tries to come and take those freedoms away. As such, the government, I would argue, needs to be pretty large and pretty powerful in such a way that it cannot be toppled by malicious parties. The only problem with that, and what we haven't yet figured out, is who or what do we entrust this much power to? And that is indeed something I'm willing to debate, because I'm not convinced that we're there yet to a point where we can just blindly trust that something or someone will always have our best interests at heart.
Okay. All right. That works as a good opening statement. So, moving on to Nida. 2 minutes. Why do you think that the government should be limited?
Well, I believe the government should be limited because there are many aspects of the government that when they get too powerful, they take away from the rights of the people. Now, a great example of that could be Waco. Another great example of that could be systematic injustices and whatnot. If you give the government too much power, they inhibit the rights of the people. An example I can give is the war on drugs. The war on drugs is completely unjustified, and the government had too much power. With that power, what they did was they infringed other people's rights. They wrongly convicted people of drug charges, and on top of that, since the government had so much power, they could put extreme charges or extreme instead of it being a misdemeanor, they could turn it into a felony. just a certain amount of drugs, even if this drug isn't life threatening, such as marijuana. And these laws were actually created by the government. Now, also another issue is that if the government is too big and too controlling, we see negatives of that. And what we see is, one, everything becomes too politically correct. Our freedom of speech is inhibited. Two, if the government gets too big, they also still have the power to again be a tyrannical government over us. They could take away our means of protection, our means of the way we want to live. I'm a Muslim in this country and I'm a first generation here. If the government here was too big, then I would not be able to practice my religion completely freely, or um, just be who I am. And on top of that, when the government again becomes too big, the people have less power. How do they have less power? Government can roll out regulations against bearing arms. Arms are not just for protection for your own self, it's also so you can revolt against a tyrannical government. That's how we had the revolution in the United States. Um, Now, another part is that I do believe there should be government regulation. It's not that there should be no government at all. Government regulation in instances where, yes, we can't depend on the best of human nature, because human nature doesn't exist like that. Another problem with big government is that it may become a dictatorship or a fascist government, and we've already seen that in a great example is Chile. Chile, they tried to become more communist and regulate everything through the people and the government. They always preach the people, the people, the people, but what ends up happening is the people are completely neglected, and the people at up top are the ones that actually run the country. And to reduce and to basically eliminate that from happening, the people should, like you said, Ovi, we should have checks and balances between the people and the government.
Okay, I think that works well as an opening statement. So let's move on to Ovi now. And let's say you've got 5 minutes to sort of bring forth your first argument.
Okay. Okay, so my first argument here is I agree in the sense that without the checks and balances, right, you can have a very e easy situation where the government can slip into dictatorship and like essentially have its boot on people's necks. There's no disagreement there, but at the same time, I would argue, the best governments in the world right now are arguably some of the biggest governments in the world right now, right? It seems to me like there's this very ironic situation where you have both the left and the right and the authoritarians and the libertarians that all just seem to love Scandinavian countries, right? But if you actually look at Scandinavian countries, like they got huge governments. They have a crap ton of policy. They essentially, the reason why it's working is because they've managed to enforce a culture where they really look out for the best um, for their people while they implement a massive government, right? So my argument here is not, big government automatically good. I'm saying you can do so you can do terrible things with small government, great things with small government, and the same thing with big government. You can do terrible things or you can do great things with big government. But between the great things that you can do with big government versus the great things that you can do with small government, I would say there's much more you can do with the big government, because you ensure that people have all the social nets that they need. You can ensure that you prevent homelessness, and at the same time, you can still ensure that people have enough freedom to feel like they're living happily and that they're living, they're living in a society that allows them to be the best version of themselves, right? And I guess how are you going to have that in America, for example, if you don't have enough tax money to fund all of these programs, right? And I'm just talking about the welfare programs. I'm also talking about just good good education, like a big problem that I keep thumping over and over and over when it comes to how do we improve society is that we don't put enough funds into public education right now, especially in the US, from what I've noticed. And it's worse than just the fact that there's not enough education funds, is the fact that the education funds come out of local taxes that are based on real estate value. And so without nationalizing this pool of money, you can never really guarantee that every child in America will have a good enough education to give them enough of a start and to be able to do the most they can with their freedom, if you can still consider it freedom after your tax money gets rerouted. That's essentially my main point here is
Mm.
sure. So TLDR of my main point here is that of course you can have like horrible, atrocious situations if you let a big government get out of hand. But if done right, a big government can have the best possible outcomes for its population.
All right, I think that works as a opening argument. So from here on out, we're just going to be doing rebuttals and then restatements of arguments. So, Nida, do you have a response for what Ovi has brought up here?
Yes. So with the big government, and an issue that we had recently seen in the United States is Obamacare. Now, I greatly support the idea. The idea is great. You know, everyone should be able to get healthcare. But when um when you have something that is governmentally run, there's no incentive to actually do better there. That's why Obamacare didn't do well. Same thing you see in the DMV, right? You see in the DMV that people really don't have the incentive to serve the people because they don't have any benefits coming from that. So therefore, the DMV just sucks. The operation sucks, the time sucks, the entirety of it sucks. There's no incentive there to do anything better or to actually achieve anything because you're just pushing paper. So when it comes to health insurance, that didn't work very well. When if you are going to implement something within the government to reform education, that I think that because the government had so much control over the education, there were aspects that ensured discrimination in the education system, such as the first year there were segregated schools. The government had so much power that they closed down all the other public high schools. So Black students were not able to go to those public high schools. They literally had to sit in for a whole year while they kept the private school open and all the other white kids got educations. So that's another downside for the government for being too big, because then you have too much control over things. And then the redlining, greenlining, like the government is what basically determined redlining and greenlining. African American communities were not approved for getting loans or mortgages to purchase homes in predominantly white areas. And who did that? That was the government. So if you give the government too much power, one, it will continue systematic racism or systematic oppression, and two, these systems will never be reformed because the government does not care. The government does not stand for the people. And if you giving so much faith to the government is not healthy. Now you're talking about these Scandinavian nations with great education systems, great social systems. Yes, they do. But you also have to see that the citizens don't have as much freedom. They don't have the right to bear arms. They can't hold the arms at home. They have to give them up.
But do you really think that this makes them more miserable than Americans?
No. I don't think that just guns itself makes a population more happy or miserable.
Oh, Nida, you've cut out there. I can't hear you anymore.
They at the end of the day, they
Hold on. I couldn't hear you for like a minute there.
Yeah, roll it back. Yeah, roll it back. What was the last thing you heard, Ovi?
So speaking about the Scandinavian nations, I said, are they much worse?
Yeah, I think the last thing I heard you. I heard the last thing you mentioned was they can't even have their guns at home.
No, they can't have their guns at home. Doesn't that inhibit their freedoms, like to be able to revolt against a tyrannical government? And they also still have, they may be just headshots of monarchies, but they still do have monarchies. It's not a complete democracy there.
Right, so
The monarchies may be figureheads.
Okay.
Let's go to Ovi for another couple of minutes.
Okay. So two things here. The first one, I'll go backwards, I guess. But the first thing is, yes, that's actually exactly the point that I'm trying to make here. It's that you don't need ultimate, like absolute freedom is what people thought they wanted in their pursuit of happiness. But at the end of the day, people are truly in the pursuit of happiness. They're not in the pursuit of freedom. It just so happens that freedom is a major component of happiness, right? But happiness isn't made out of 100% freedom. It's more like, look at freedom like an alcohol, I'd say. Like 100% alcohol absolutely sucks, but if you have a glass of whiskey, it's pretty good shit, right? That's how I kind of look at freedom from this perspective. Like, sure, yeah, like guns are more regulated in the rest of the civilized world than in the USA. And it's true that Americans, at least from where I sit in Canada, it seems to me like Americans are very proud of their guns, and not just their guns, but their right to bear arms, right? And in principle, it sounds really nice, but it seems to me like, objectively speaking, this right to bear arms has been letting people hurt themselves more than it has been doing any good. And to add on top of that, I would argue the right to bear arms isn't going to help Americans topple a government at this point, because and I've been saying this online a lot, like what's your AR going to do against an unmanned drone? What's your AR going to do when the tank through the neighborhood? What's your AR going to do when they can just shut off all your electricity, jam all your signals, jam everything to a point where all you have left are the ARs, and you basically have to get out of your compound where you're kind of like hold up, because they're able to just kind of cut you off from anything you need, right? So I'm just saying, like the government has.
Okay, hold up a sec.
Okay.
Yep, Nita, go ahead.
So you're exactly saying my point. Like, if the government has these things, why shouldn't citizens be able to obtain these things?
Right.
Exactly. So we don't have any chance of actually toppling a tyrannical government if they're going to continue to censor what we can do and cannot do. Now, another point is, I believe you are right. Americans do have an issue with hurting themselves with, going crazy with, I can do this, that, and the other. But there are aspects of government that are very beneficial, such as regulation. Regulation is okay, but the infringement of our rights is not, as in taking away guns. That's not gonna do anything. Just last night, you can literally put is it a 50 caliber bullet into a shotgun. The ones that are used for ARs or whatnot.
Okay.
I
don't
think
know what any of that.
I believe
So
that would
basically,
result in harm, and I do not recommend this. If you're listening in and think it's a good idea to stick a 50 cal
it's not a good idea.
bullet
No.
in
It
a
is
shotgun,
absolutely not a good idea.
please refrain from doing so.
Please refrain from doing so. But it is possible to do that. You can literally make a shotgun out of like piping from like plumber pipes.
I know what Nida's referring to. She's talking about it's really easy to make sort of. You've played Fallout before, right? You understand what piped weaponry is.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So
there you go.
I have a good idea of what pipe weaponry is.
Right,
it's
so
extremely easy to be able to obtain these things. So actually regulating them like this is not gonna work.
So
it's not gonna work.
Just before we move back to Ovi, I just wanted to read out this one line. So just to see if it influences any of your arguments. Positive liberty is the possession of the capacity to act upon one's free will, as opposed to negative liberty, which is freedom from external restraint on one's actions. Go ahead, Ovi.
I'm trying to take that in for a second. Can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah, sure. So, positive liberty is the possession of the capacity to act upon one's free will. So, positive liberty is the ability to do what you want. Hang on. Positive liberty is as opposed to negative liberty, which is the freedom from external restraint on one's actions. So, positive liberty is the ability to do things, and negative liberty is the ability to not be prevented from doing things. They both kind of mean the same. They're both freedom, but I would say that positive liberty is what the left strives for. They want to be able to do more things. And negative freedom is what the right strives for. They want less restrictions upon their actions. So the left kind of wants like new kinds of freedoms, whereas conservatives want more protections on the freedoms already extant, if that makes sense.
Right. That does make sense. Now, okay, so Nita, you made a very good point, and gave you that in that, at the end of the day, part of the reason why Americans could not currently defend themselves against tyrannical government is specifically because the government's already too big and it's already too technologically advanced for a regular citizen to be able to stand up to them in might and power, regardless of how many citizens might try to stand up to it, right? So you're absolutely right from that perspective. The issue I take here is that you're already in this situation, right? It's like from that point of view, it can't really get much worse than that in terms of your odds of toppling a government. The only thing that can get worse right now is your willpower to topple a government. Which essentially what I'm trying to say here is I guess the government's essentially good enough that you wouldn't want that, or at least a large enough portion of Americans don't want that for it to happen right now, right? Despite the riots, despite everything else, right? What? So it seems ironic to me because the way I look at it right now, you guys are basically saying, okay, stop. Like, government is already too big. So we will not let the government get bigger in the ways that it would actually help us because it's already big in the ways that are not helpful to us.
We have to do a reform on our system, because if we
Ovi,
add
could
more
you leave and
government,
rejoin quickly? There was some audio issues. Need to respond?
me?
Yes.
No, neither. You're fine. Ovi, could you leave and rejoin?
Okay.
So, what did you think of the positive versus negative freedom, Nida?
What I thought of the positive versus negative freedom,
Is this any better?
Yep.
it reminded me of the horseshoe theory again. Like, that's something I always go to because I actually do believe in it. See, that's the thing. It's like where you want protection of your freedoms already, but then you want more freedoms, and I think it's a paradox in and of itself. But I was gonna go off of what Ovi was saying about the bigger government, and how we have big government on one aspect and we have small government on another aspect, where it's actually beneficial to us. Yes, that's a great point. But then what you have to implement is you have to balance them. Meaning, if you have too much government on this side, you need to get less government on this side. Now, if you want less
Is there a
government on
reason
this
why
side,
that would be the case?
what do you mean? Explain.
Like, really understand why we need to keep, for example, government smaller, from the point of like public education and public health and stuff like that, only because you guys have a massive government when it comes to national defense and military
Militarization.
spending
Yes, yes.
and
I think what should
police spending and all of that.
I think what should happen is you see like we have this entity of a government here, and it has too many bubbles on this side, which is the militarization aspect. What we could do instead is take some of that militarization and shift it towards the social aspects, such as school, such as hospitals, development of technology, instead of focusing just on protection, military, police, whatnot. The police actually have an extremely large budget. It's larger than it's very, very, it's
Oh, it's ridiculous.
disproportionately.
Yeah, I've been looking at the numbers lately.
No, it's disproportionately large. And as an American, that's very, very, very sad, because you're right. You're absolutely right. We do have aspects that we need to reform, such as our test taking, our education systems. Like, why is it that our country nobody knows how to speak multiple languages? It's only one. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
That's most countries, though.
That's not most countries.
Really?
Usually, they know the language of their neighboring country, at the least.
Well, I'm just going to throw a monkey wrench
Well,
into this and say America's military budget is so high because it does have to also supply a lot of military goods to NATO as to prop up a lot of
Yes,
NATO.
absolutely. You're right. They have a clause with NATO where they kind of
And so
protect
just
the other country.
so I can wrap up and then butt out. So it might not be equivalent for certain European nations that you might want to draw comparisons to, because let's take Norway, for instance. You could say Norway has a great economy, has a really well-functioning government. No complaints about Norway. But the thing about Norway is it gets all of its military protection from America. And so Norwegians could easily say, oh, your military budget is so high. Look at you. You're so aggressive, blah, blah, blah. But do you see there's a certain amount of hypocrisy there? So well, I agree, of course, that militarization in America is ridiculous. But do you have a solution for this problem I've presented?
You can't pull out of NATO. That's gonna that's gonna cause too many problems.
try
What
to get
instead you
China to invade.
what you can do instead, I would say, is help Norway become independent of your protection. But America's never going to do that. And the reason why America's not going to do that is because they like holding that power.
And the war economy,
That's part of the reason. Yes, that's exactly it. But if realistically, idealistically, if you really wanted to free America of these burdens, it would literally to be helping these countries become independent. Because in the long run, not only is that good for them, it's good for us. And what's good for us is going to be good for them. If we can't, the problem with America is we can't work together with another country. We're very what's the word? We prefer isolationism a lot.
Or globalism on their own terms.
Say that once more. You cut off.
Or rather globalism, but on your own terms. Hold on, let me just go on my cell phone because I feel like my connection is going down again.
Yes, globalism on your own terms. But America absolutely has every power, every place, every right to do that because they have achieved themselves that way. Not saying it's a good thing, but they do hold the power. So they should be given credit where due.
I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Yeah. Now I am going to bring up.
Hello.
Yes. Are you there?
Wow, that really was 2 seconds. I thought that was a euphemism, but he really was back in 2 seconds, wasn't he?
Yeah. Hold on. How do I put camera on here?
You press the camera button.
Yeah, there should be a button with a camera on it. Press that.
Hold on. I'll show you guys what I see. Let me just send it to you guys on Messenger.
So, just to keep this rolling, so let's think. What about other than America? Is it a good idea for other countries to have smaller or larger governments? European countries, maybe, or Asian ones?
Is it okay if I bring one point up real quick?
Yeah, of course.
So I wanted to talk about Waco. Now, before I had actually watched the docuseries on it, I really didn't know much about it. You don't get taught about it. Nobody talks about it. I've never heard anyone speak about it except who? Libertarians. So
Of
then
course,
I was
it's
like,
not going to
huh,
be on the government curriculum now, is it?
I think it should be. It absolutely should be. But they're not going to put it on there because it's going to make them look bad.
Exactly.
But say that once more.
Exactly. No, I'm just agreeing. Sorry.
So thing about Waco that's really, really, it's really sad is that these people, essentially, they were not a danger to society, to themselves, or anyone else. Not exactly anyone else. There was a child predator. It was the leader of the Branch Davidians, right?
Hmm.
And the concern was that they lived in a compound that may have not been suitable for human living, and that this is just projections they're letting out, and that there may be a child there that's married to someone, or she's being sexually abused. Now what happened was the Branch Davidians, they believed that they were practicing their own religion in their own way. So the government was imposing themselves on them because the Branch Davidians had no intention of going to war with the government, to hurting the government, nothing like that. They just had protection, like they had their own protection. And that's what kind of scared the government or hurt the government's ego a little bit, that these people are living on their own terms and they have so much protection and they have so many people in this compound, this can turn into something else. What happened was they shot them up. They were willing to come out, and then at the last minute they tear gas them. Now, the thing about this tear gas that everyone knows is that this tear gas is extremely flammable. So this is a tactic that has been seen multiple times used by the government, saying these people are dangerous when they're actually not. They tear gas them, light that tear gas on fire, and try to kill them off so we can't speak about it.
Hmm. But just in
So
case you
sorry,
missed,
I
just in case
kinda-
you missed the beginning of that, we were talking about Waco and the government siege. So
I actually don't know much about Waco. I'm Googling it as we speak. I guess it happened sometime in 1993.
And yes, it was
So-
somewhere in the early 90s.
you
late
heard
80s.
you heard the back end of that, so you know how bad it went. So Nida, could you just repeat the very beginning, so for Ovi?
So basically, what happened at Waco is the government got wind that these people are living together, and they're just living together under unusual circumstances. They were worried about the habitation, the system of habitation they had, and also a minor worry that there was a minor married to someone that an adult, essentially. And they were worried about child abuse or sexual abuse or whatever it was. Those were the excuses they used to enter them. What it really was is the government had its ego hurt because these people were living on their own accord with weapons, and with such a mass amount of people, 200 people or something like that, that believed in the Branch Davidians, and they were actually not a threat to society. They believed a little bit differently. Now, I am not condoning pedophilia. That was doing with the girl. She was completely groomed, but that did not require you killing so many people. They ended up trying to extract the people. The people wouldn't come out, and then they finally agreed to come out. But instead, what happened was they tear gassed them, and the tear gas was flammable. They knew that, and they basically blew the whole place up.
So your argument, just to clarify,
Yeah, I'm looking
is
at the pictures right now. It's
so just to clarify,
My
your argument is
that a
essentially
government trying to regulate everyone else's life, that's
Yeah.
dangerous because you see what happened to them.
also
And
that
this is why we
while
need to bear arms.
while what was going on in that compound may have been dangerous or nasty, or I'm not even aware of exactly what the details were, but no matter what went on there, you think the government's response was heavy-handed and overbearing, and
Absolutely, absolutely.
and would you say
100%,
that's
because
emblematic of other sort of government actions? Are you using that to say that this is how government can go overboard?
yes, there was another incident where there was a house that used to produce marijuana. Now,
no.
marijuana one is not a drug that kills people unless it's laced with cocaine,
Really?
heroin, fentanyl, or whatever.
Or
Yes.
you drop a ton of it on someone's head.
Broski. I'm sorry.
Or you drop a ton of it on someone's head.
That's true. You could kill them that way, but realistically, the use of marijuana really doesn't kill people. But what happened was there was this house that was marijuana. I do not remember the people that were involved in it, but the government was feeling uncomfortable with so many people entangling themselves in marijuana. Now, what they ended up doing was the same thing: tear gas, set it on fire, kill all the people. It happened again, and there are multiple accounts of where this has happened. So
Sounds like just a general U.S. government response to things they don't like.
so this goes no, this yes, absolutely, and that's what happens when the government too much power. Now this goes back to the point that you were saying, where we allocate too much government on one side and we don't have enough government on the other side. So when you give
Right.
too much government on one side, this is exactly what happens. So there needs to be an even distribution of government, not a big government, not a small government, a government that just works based on your population.
So
So
what's your answer to people who would say, but that's socialism?
They don't know what socialism is. They've never actually studied socialism.
I
Socialism
agree.
is literally having there is no ownership at all of of industries. It's
So
completely
Right.
distributed within the people. That's not what the if you have to it's like what you were saying earlier. It's like if you have straight up 100% alcohol, that shit tastes like just like ass. But if you have a good glass of whiskey, because it's incorporated with other ingredients, it tastes good. Exactly the same. You can't have a completely capitalist of government. You can't have a completely socialist or communist government. It just doesn't work. You have to
Yeah,
take
you need
good
nuance.
aspects of
Like
each.
at the end of the day, people keep forgetting on I think the longer they spend on social media, the more they forget that every side has a nuance, right? And just because you're fighting for whatever side, it doesn't mean that the other side doesn't have a very valid reason why they're bringing up their own problem, right? And I know we're going a little bit off topic here, but this is important to say it out loud because people keep forgetting this stuff, right? It's the fact that if you're disagreeing with another side and you are under the impression that the other side is completely nuts, it's most likely because you are not taking into account nuanced points where they might actually have reasonable ideas that your side does not necessarily condone or has not necessarily taken into account, right?
so
The world is a complicated place, too complicated for one brain to kind of take it all in, unfortunately, right? And so thank you, Nita, for bringing that up because like it's a huge problem that we're currently facing on the internet, right?
So this is a great segue for what I wanted to move topic onto next, which was how do we generalize this from America to the rest of the world? Because we've talked about America-centric problems. We've talked about how the government is very overbearing in America. But how does that map on to the situation that the rest of the world finds itself in? Is it similar in South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia even? Or
I can speak mostly on Asia, a lot on
go
Asia,
ahead.
and it's going to be three countries. It's going to be India, Bangladesh, and Korea. You know, my husband and I were talking about it the other day. It's we take a lot of our freedoms for granted here. Like I'm able to talk to you guys on my phone. I don't even know if in North Korea they have phones. Yes, absolutely, North Korea has too much government, and that's why it's so overbearing. We don't even know what's happening to the people. India is getting on that path where they're trying to enforce too much government. They're trying to censor people words. If you speak against the government, you can be charged with treason. They're trying to make a
Modi's
law like
government.
that. In Bangladesh, the government's so bad, the prime minister, she literally edited the constitution to make sure she's prime minister for fucking life. Yeah.
And she could just do that.
She could just do that. There's too much government. That's the problem.
That's illegal.
That's crazy.
Wait, what? Who said what?
Yeah, Sonny, you disappeared. Oh shit, I guess we're in a modless debate now.
But yeah, no, in Bangladesh, like the prime minister, she was actually able to do that. On top of that, Bangladesh has a very rigged two-party system. It's just these two women at war, always. That's it. There's nothing else. There's no implementation of anything. The government gives no fucks about its citizens. An example I can give is we have a great source of geothermal energy in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is still a third world country and it's doing very poorly. But we have a great source of geothermal energy that if we actually took the initiative to actually for the citizens to be in charge of what happens to this energy, then we could sell this abroad or we could use it for ourselves and we can stop being dependent on India for energy. But no, the government,
Right.
because it has so much power, it will not allocate its resources to actually making the country better. Instead, the government, what it does is,
Too many kickbacks in the contracts.
yes. Wait, say that again?
Tic-tacs.
There's
Oh,
too many kickbacks in the contract.
Yes, there are way too many kickbacks in the contracts.
I thought you said
Way too
tic-tacs.
many. I thought that too.
That too. Imagine the amount of Tic Tacs that people can buy. Oh man.
Imagine the tic-tac kickbacks they get, just like tic-tacs for life.
Again, going back to the international aspect, if you look at Europe before, it was completely feudalist. And that means that it had too much government. The monarchies controlled everything. The people, they didn't have much. They barely had a class.
Yeah, as a Brit, who
okay.
was living
Hold on,
under
hold
a
on.
serf system, our ancestors, I could speak a little bit on this. But Ovi, do you have any regional information
Yes,
to bring up?
actually, I do have a very direct response to that because I just realized this might mean that we might actually have very different definitions of big government here, right? Because in the feudal times, there was no one government that was more powerful than any current European government, right? Like from an objective perspective. So what I mean by that, like, sure, you know, like the king had quote unquote absolute power, and the king could chop your head off if you did not act according to what the king's mood was that day, right? So, yes, from that perspective, you could call it big government, but at the same time, the king was sometimes less powerful than one of his lords, as long as the lord himself actually had more resources than the king to running their lands better, right? These feudal people could still not really tell peasants how to run their daily lives because they didn't have the resources to regulate the shit out of those lives other than just like taking a crap of tax, right? So the biggest extent to which the government was big under feudal times is that they restricted your freedoms and they collected a shit ton of tax, but they had a very limited power in terms of policy. So I feel like now we almost need to like spend some time debating what big government even means, like the definition of it, because I think you guys, both you and Sunny, kind of talk more about, you know, individual freedoms, whereas I'm talking more about the objective reach of the government into any and every branch of life possible.
So this is an interesting point, and I'm going to try to pose a question to Nida with this. So you've brought up the distinction in my mind between not absolute power, that means something else, but sort of that there might be an absolute scale of power, like heat. Like there's cold and there's heat, and heat is just cold is just the absence of heat, right? So I can see that you're sort of referring to this scale of power where at one end you are, I don't know, a rock, and at the other end you are a galaxy-faring alien that can, you know, create whatever and destroy entire solar systems with their mind, right? So,
Right.
but then there's also, you brought up power disparity, which is, in my mind, more important, which is interesting because I have always considered feudal societies to be horrifically oppressive, of course. But
Of course.
you bring up this idea of is it important to have sort of a reduction of power across the board, or is it important to make it so that there is less disparity in power, so that people are brought up to the level of power of the government instead of the government's brought down to the level of power of the people. That might not be what you were saying, but the question I have for Nida is, what do you think of this distinction between sort of absolute power and the power to enact your will on the world, and power disparity? So you might have someone that's living in poverty today, but they have flat screen TV, iPhone, and a fridge. But that's nothing compared to, let's say, the $1 trillion black budget deals that the Pentagon has. It's just not comparable. So, do you have a take on that?
I think there should be more of regulation of how much power that person can have. Wait, could you say that question again? I'm so confused.
It
Sorry.
is a little confusing how you
It-
put it, Sunny. I don't think I can wrap my head around it fully either.
I was trying to wrap my head around it as I was saying it. Essentially, Ovi mentioned that during feudal times, while they might have had more relative power compared to the peasants, like the king obviously has way more power than the peasant does. The king has less absolute power, perhaps, than the poor people of today, because the king couldn't have every meal, be delivered, hand delivered to them. He couldn't have had news from across the world. He couldn't have had all of the technological enhancements that we've had. So there's a difference between relative power and absolute power, which I'm defining as your actual ability to influence things in the world.
Okay.
And so, how does that play into what your ideal government type would be, or how to best sort of restrict power from becoming abusive?
The best way to restrict power from becoming abusive is literally to limit what the powers of the government.
Hmm.
It's to give guidelines on what the government can do. Now, yes, we do have more access and more ability to sway things as a population because of what we have at our fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, even if you have those things at your fingertips, if you don't have the wealth to do, if you don't have the wealth to back it, it makes no difference.
Yeah.
Because what I see in today's society is that wealth is what speaks for everything.
So
with wealth, you can disappear. With wealth, you can make someone disappear. With wealth, you can change laws.
So it does sound like you agree with my assessment that it's the disparity of power that is
Yes.
the worst thing.
Yes, it's the disparity of power that's the worst thing, yes.
So on that note, I would like to say, and of course, like I'm kind of changing my mind as I'm also kind of learning from this conversation, right? But wouldn't you guys say that it is therefore the best possible thing it would therefore be that a government has the highest possible amount of absolute power, provided that this absolute power is not creating a massive disparity in its relative power against its people.
But that won't work.
I can okay.
That won't work.
Go ahead.
That's not going to work because you can't, you literally cannot trust the government to be good if it has that much power.
Let me try to restate Ovi's point, because I think I understood.
That it has
right, so
provided it has low relative power against the people. So what I mean by that is give the government the power to change all these things, to have all this reach, provided that it's easy to kind of like slap its hands when it like tries to reach into places it shouldn't.
That could work. That's a good compromise. But how are you going to implement that is the question.
Well, now we're kind of coming back a full 360 to my original opening statement, which is where I was saying essentially we don't yet have a way to trust anything or anyone with that much power, because at this point we don't have proof that we can trust any one given human with that much power, and therefore, if any system is human, how do we, you know, how do we implement this?
Let's try to not get caught in the weeds of actual implementation. Keep it in theory for now, because I think this is where the interesting ideas are. So I think Ovi brings up a really interesting sort of compromise in that, Nida, I'm not sure if you fully understood what he said when he first stated it. I think what Ovi is saying is that government power is okay. Like, we need the government to be more powerful than the average person, Ovi is saying. Otherwise, there can be no structure. However, the government should not be so much more powerful than the people that it's impossible to hold them to account.
So, okay, so what I think a compromise to that could be that the government can have its fingers in all aspects of societal regulation, just a little bit though,
All aspects.
Such as
Know about all aspects, even now.
Yeah, I'm not sure about all aspects. I'm not a big fan of the surveillance state, for instance.
Did I just become more libertarian than Nita?
No. I actually don't believe that. I'm saying that could be a compromise for you, which is whichever aspects you want the government to actually have their hand in. Yes, they can. But like you had said, the government should have this much power, whereas we have this much power.
I see what you mean, but
not quite what I'm saying.
But collectively, right, Nida? So the people collectively have more power than the government.
Yes.
But every individual person has less power than the government. The government has the power to arrest a person that commits a crime and try them and put them in a cage. The government has more power than the individual. But a million-man march coming down on the government, they're going to be forced to comply with the people's orders. So I think that's a decent enough compromise, because it means that as long as they're not, screwing around with their power, people won't gather and undo that power. I do believe there needs to be more accountability.
A problem with that is, an example I can give you is, imagine a man is arrested down the street and you're there. A man's being arrested on the street and you're there, and he's being arrested for really benign, like saying fuck you to the police, and you're there to document it. The police, they threaten you with, oh, we're going to arrest you if you come too close to us because you're an infringement to traffic. They can actually use that and say, oh, I justifiably arrested this person because they were an infringement of traffic, when really they're not. So doesn't that give too much power to the government, to the police?
Ovi?
How would you balance that out?
Let's see.
I think we would all hope that the laws being enforced would be just, which is something that we could help influence if there was less power disparity.
I mean, that's the ultimate hope.
That's the ultimate hope, but that's not how it is.
No, that is not how it is.
Not.
So how would you, if you're going to say that, oh, the people should have this much power, whereas the government has a little bit more individually, then how would you protect yourself in this situation where the government really has a lot more power individually than you do individually?
That's where you would hope that the checks and balances work in the people's favor.
That's when you would hope the courts would step
pushing
in.
for it and appealing them until justice is served will eventually get the government to comply.
Also, another aspect of the government that has too much power is businesses. In the aspect of business, what they do is, if you can prove that you are using something for your business, or it's associated with your business, you get a tax write-off. You basically don't get taxed for, or it's reduced tax, or whatever it is. Now that creates loopholes, and the loopholes exist so the government can so the government can implement its own policies based on its own interests. How would you fix that?
I think
So
this is an
actually, this might open a whole can of worms, but I would argue the reason why this is even happening can be attributed to the fact that we're even letting private organizations have a say in the limitations of the government, right? And that comes through the what's it called? Therefore, basically, when governments send or private corporations send their agents to kind of like
lobbyists.
negotiate with the government, lobbying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lobbying. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, it's this big chink in the U.S. government's armor, which is it lets private individuals kind of force the government's hand in terms of how big they think the government should be, and private corporations are taking advantage of these loopholes.
So I think this is a
Right?
really
Because
interesting
then private
segue.
corporations can basically say, we work for the people
Mm.
because we limit government, but really they're limiting government in ways that let them like be further more oppressive.
I think this is an interesting sort of subtopic on the
Yeah.
topic of law. What do you think the best legal system for a country is? Because there are so many ways that you could structure it. Do you believe that the ideal country would have law, like a doctrine set out in a series of legal documents? How else would you run a country even? There's a difference between sort of laws, statutes, all of these kind of things. Common law is law set up by precedent. What is Nida giggling on about?
Sonny, you didn't see that, did you?
No, what happened? Nida.
Lorenzo being Lorenzo.
It looks like pubes.
Oh my
Oh my
god.
gosh.
Okay.
I don't think a country could function without laws. It's not possible. That's just complete anarchy.
That wasn't what I was saying. I was saying, what system of law do you think is best?
I mean, I think America's system of checks and balances is great, but we just have to fix the loopholes in it.
There's one thing I would fix to the existing American/Canadian legal system, because they're actually sort of similar. Sometimes the precedence law can be a bad thing. And I guess this is the whole point of kind of having judges at local or national levels of Supreme Court kind of make final decisions. But even on those final decisions, sometimes different sets of judges at the same level can actually have contradicting precedent setting, which can then just make a further mess out of the legal system, right? So I could still be wrong, but I would like to explore the idea of giving elected politicians the ability to kind of create final amendments in when there's conflicting precedents in certain cases.
Explain how that would work. Like, if you have the judges and they have conflicting viewpoints on a certain case, how would this politician be able to weigh in on that?
Right. So the freshest example I have in mind, right, is police brutality and how it's so. Again, I've taken this out of a John Oliver bit, so don't take it with a grain of salt. But essentially, I thought you brought up a very good point, which is there was a police brutality case that went all the way up to Supreme Court, right? which is essentially the chink in the arm right now for police for police brutality who try for police brutality cases in which the police department is trying to defend dirty cops, right? So the exact example here is actually that the Supreme Court judge wrote a very specific language that as long as the cop punches or pistol whips the person, um, or there's something around like the way he got attacked, and as long as the cop attacks them the exact way, right, then that is considered police brutality, and the cop needs to be, put away or fired or whatever, right? So one way that other judges have kind of bypassed this final thing is by saying, well, he didn't get pistol whipped, he just got kicked in the face repeatedly. Therefore, it's not police brutality because by the Supreme Judge definition, this is not what the Supreme Judge defined police brutality to be. Do you see how dirty that is?
Yeah, that's very
Okay.
it's completely based on linguistics, and
Right.
that's
So that is the type of stuff where I'm saying where, if an issue is pressing enough, and unfortunately there's no way in a precedence law court, it's impossible to try to reconciliate 100% of issues, right? But I think there should be an easier way for elected government officials to be able to set the record straight on a few things like that, um, in manners that are slightly faster than getting the president to sign a bill about it.
I would say to limit that even further, it would have to be based on the population that they are representing, such as if this happened in Los Angeles and the Supreme Court judge is speaking on an event that happened in Los Angeles and it's contradictory, conflicting, etc., etc., you would have to ask the
Right.
politicians of Los Angeles
Yep.
that represent the people of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But
And the other cool part worth exploring here, sorry to interrupt, just last piece here, is I've been looking at the Swiss government model, which again, not perfect, but they have elections every 6 months. And these are not necessarily like presidential elections every 6 months. These are more, first of all, like they're essentially run by a board of governors. They're not really run by a president per se. It's more like a board of executives, which is pretty cool. But the absolutely coolest part about their system is that every 6 months, citizens get to vote on hot topics. So if they need to pass a law really quickly, one way to do that without it being blocked in government is they can request to just have a vote on it. And then the people of
that's direct
Switzerland can just
democracy. So
fucking
you're
vote
saying
that.
they have aspects of direct democracy that are very beneficial for their society.
Yeah, of course, 100%.
Now, no, you're absolutely right when it comes to like the stimulus checks in America. The freaking government cannot, like, the Republicans are like, no, the Democrats are like, yes, the Democrats are like, oh, I'm gonna put some sly shit in there. The Republicans are like, oh, I'm gonna put some medical the medical bill about abortion in there and whatnot. It's like, no, that is what is part of the problem with the loopholes. You're right, you're absolutely right. But what you're saying actually supports my argument of less government, because you're putting
But how would
the
you implement a
decision.
system this okay, less government relative power, which I agree with.
No, I
But
agree
in
with that
order
as
for
well.
that to happen, you actually need more absolute power for them to be able to kind of implement this deep web of reaching out to its people that doesn't exist right now. We don't have the infrastructure right now in North America to do that.
It would be it's very easy to implement the direct democracy aspect where you're asking the citizens to vote on something every 6 months, whatever hot topic it is.
It would be as long as the government's big enough to be able to handle such a massive function.
How would
Do
our
you see what I
existing
mean by
government in
big
America,
government, though?
how would the existing government in America or Canada not be able to implement this? Because I think their government is big enough to be able to do this.
You need more officers of the law in order to kind of be full. So, right, I don't know how it works in the US, but I know in like Elections Canada is a council made up of like part-time people of the working class, right? If you want to be involved in Elections Canada, you can actually get involved. Like as a citizen, I can get involved in Elections Canada, right? I've actually been at the polling station in our last election, and I was overseeing the vote count, because you can just do that as a citizen, right? Like you can go and be part of the counting process to just witness it for yourself that this is getting done in a fair manner, right?
So I don't know
So,
if we
but the
have that in
problem is,
America.
if you're doing it this often, you're going to need a lot more part-time people to kind of run all this stuff, right? Because now it's every 6 months instead of every 4 years.
That's
Because of
interesting.
that, you also now need more funds in terms of, you know, where those elections are going to happen. You need a slightly better organization, because you can't just use the local gym where you normally vote as often, you know, or you know, there might be some problems there. On top of that, you might want a better counting system. Like I don't know about America, but like in Canada, the counting system is still via papers, and you still have people like counting paper after paper and whatever. And sometimes there's recounts, you know, like that happens. Sometimes there's recounts. And so in a system like the Swiss one, right? You would need something so robust that you for sure know that there's no need for recount, because you for sure know that they're so professional that they're not going to lose a ballot. They're not going to, you know, something like that is not going to happen if you're going to vote on such a constant basis that politicians could use it as a weapon to basically say, well, it's not legitimate if X and Y happened.
So in the United States, I don't think citizens actually count the votes. I think it's elected. I think it's part of the governmental officials that count the votes, and that is a terrible thing because I really like the system you guys have in Canada, whereas the actual citizens are able to count the votes or at least witness the counting of. We've had, you already know the instances of, you know, all the Florida when Bush was elected and whatnot, but I do agree when you're saying that for the people to be directly involved in the government needs to itself implement more and
Yeah,
allocate itself more. Um that means that what you're saying is that the government is widespread but thin.
exactly. But
Okay.
that is a big government, right? So I've spent quite a big part of this debate trying to essentially get to the bottom of what big government really is. um, because big
I can agree
government,
on that.
a
I,
very
I can
general term.
I can agree on that. Widespread but thin. As long as
Yeah,
it's thin, there's no problem. But the thing
yeah.
is that when it's so widespread, how do you make sure ensure that it doesn't become thicker? You don't like it,
And
what
the
I'm trying to
problem,
say
no,
is
that,
that you want a shawl, you don't want a quilt. How do you make
yeah,
sure it doesn't become a quilt?
right.
Ovi, do
So
you concede that
I
that's
don't
not
have,
how?
right, just for the,
Do you concede that that's not how most people conceive of a big government?
are you asking this to me, Sonny?
Yes.
Yes, yes, I do. I can see why this is definitely an extra uphill battle on my end, because big government can mean whatever people want it to mean in order to fit their agenda,
Mm.
right? And I
So
could
when
debate people on big government, and we could have two very separate debates.
Yeah. So that's why it's important to get definitions straight. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're right. So my definition of big government is that government regulates everything.
yeah,
Meaning, you know, there would obviously the infringement of our rights to carry arms, regulating everything, meaning my uterus as well, regulating um uh the economy, or like they're obviously regulate the economy. What I mean is like governmental just governmental institutions, like there's no privatization of any institution. I don't believe that no
Right.
institution should be privatized.
Right.
They should like, do you
You don't
understand what I'm
believe
saying?
that no institution should be privatized.
No, I believe that there should be privatized institutions. I don't believe
Okay.
in a governmentally owned like everything. No. So that's
Oh,
what
I
I thought.
love public institutions, man. Love them.
That's the
How
Eastern
so?
European in
Well,
you
think
coming
about it,
out.
right? Like, I want the government to provide me with electricity because the government will be forced to prove that the corporation that they run electricity through is cost neutral and is not for profit, right? And if it is for profit, then most of that money goes back into government coffers, which is again good for me because it goes more in structure. So it's fine. This is actually a very Canadian topic. So like this is something that I've been very adamant on. The Canadian government's looking to privatize our electricity, and they already started. Ever since they did, it's gotten worse because our bill went up, and it's like it's a free market. You pay for whoever's the cheapest, but there's like two options, and both like, well, let's decrease the prices, and there's nothing we can do, right? So I'm a big fan of some public institutions.
Okay, some that makes sense. But this also does strengthen your point of a little bit more government, because imagine you have a private entity such as your electricity company, right? If there's no regulation of the electricity company, there's no capping on the prices. If there's no capping on the prices, they can take advantage of the people.
Yup.
So there is necessary government regulations, but how, like, from what I
Right.
thought you were saying is, I thought you wanted more regulation than we already had. Bro, I don't understand why you can
No,
have.
not so.
No, listen, I don't understand.
Honestly, it's not by volume. Okay, let's wrap this up real quick, right? Because I also have to go really soon. So do you mind if I kind of go into my final
Go ahead.
thoughts, and then I can let Nita go like finish up with her final thoughts?
Absolutely, sure.
So okay, so overall, I would say to take this conversation from philosophical more to a little bit practical, right? I would say the practice of my philosophy is I don't necessarily want the volume of regulation to go down per se, but I want the regulation itself, the quality of the regulation to change, right? And I think that's a much better way to do it than to just say cut the bad regulation and put nothing instead, right? So a very specific example, you said earlier about the government regulating your uterus, right? And to put it into context, the way you're saying it is because of course, if they're anti-choice, then yes, it's like regulation. But I would argue there's technically more regulation in having an open abortion state than there is to a no abortion state, because the volume of regulation required to say no abortions whatsoever is like 3 lines, right? The volume of regulations to have a safe abortion and to have abortions that make sense and that are like uh properly implemented so that people don't die will take books and books and books of regulation. So you're hating the quality of the regulation, you're not hating the volume.
Mm.
And that is my final thought here.
So I agree. I am I am disagreeing with the quality of regulation, but I am also disagreeing with the quantity distribution of the regulation, right? I disagree. We have too many regulations, like I was saying earlier, too many regulations on one side and not as many on the other.
Yeah.
And I think the basis of it comes from the the profit system. The sides that we have too much regulation, basically they ensure more profit, and the side that we don't have enough regulation also ensures more profit, but this profit comes from the corrupt individuals in the government. Now, my basis and my closing line is have a sheet have a sheet of regulations, not a quilt over everything, and also to we need to reform our regulation system. Reform meaning not saying throw all the regulations out. No, add to the regulations or take away from the regulations, but don't completely uproot the system, because I do think that the American system that we do have is very beneficial, but it's got problems.
Okay.
Problems that can be easily solved.
So, Ovi, final thoughts. Tanida's final thoughts.
No, I like the quilt
Analogy.
comparison there. It's actually I haven't thought of it that way. But no, that I think I'm good.
So the quilt one is exactly like your straight alcohol versus whiskey. It's
Yeah, yeah.
if you have like if it's during the fall time and you've got a fat ass quilt on, you're gonna be hot. But if you've got a really
Yeah.
nice blanket or a sheet on, you'll be fine. So that's the thing. It's
Right.
just literally moderation. No wonder we're centrists.
Right. So, Ovi has got to go. So let's wrap this show up. I'm going to try
right.
to. How do I do this? I need to do that and then unfocus. There we go. Right, I've got you both on the screen now. So what I want you to do, viewers sitting at home,
right.
if you thought that Nida made good arguments, I want you to throw some love for Nida in the chat. If you think that Ovi won overall, I want you to throw some love for Ovi in the chat. And so you two, do you think you'd be up for doing this again sometime?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah, man. It was fun.
It was really fun. And it's like and like, you know, debating with very nice because it's not it's not triggering at all.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to just get in your head. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah,
right?
I would say that these are more discussions in a debate format than a straight gotcha sort of situation. Do we have?
This was also very last minute, so I would just like to say for next time, Nita, if you're down, we like do our homework and just have like examples and have Sunny poll like.
So I want to get a suggestion for next debate off both of you, and then we're going to trawl the comments in between now and whenever we do the next one to see if anyone in the audience has any suggestions.
Well, okay.
Nida, any suggestions for next debate? Anything you'd find interesting to talk about? Not necessarily with Ovi, but with anyone.
The next debate I would like to have it on some of America's regulations, such as abortion or gun regulation. That would be nice, and also the border topic, immigration.
Okay, Ovi. Next topic for debate, not necessarily with Nida.
Okay.
Wait, one more thing.
All
thing.
Right.
The Swiss aspect of the direct democracy was really good too. That was really good. I need to look into that more.
Right. Yeah, look into it.
Got a little bit of homework for Nida. So Ovi, next topic.
I wouldn't mind covering what is modern feminism and what there's left to gender equality and how much gender equality is too much gender equality.
So abortion. Abortion and
topic.
So Nida with abortion and Ovi with transgender rights. This is going to be a nice, wholesome.
I did not say transgender.
Minefield-free next to debate. Right. Time to say goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining us, everyone that commented. I have noticed here. I didn't want to interrupt the debate to shout you out, but I saw you popping up on the screen there. So I'm going to be reading over everyone's responses and for us alike, Jimdomino on Facebook, Jimdomino23 wherever I'm not Jimdomino, and yeah, say goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Peace out.
Bye.